Alright everyone, it's time for us to go and take a look at the Samsung Galaxy S23 and compare it against the Samsung Galaxy Z Flip 4 and see which specific phone is the better one for you. Now I will definitely tell you when it comes down to it, both these phones are very unique, they are kind of different, but I do think they're kind of reaching for the same type of audience, especially now, considering that the Z Flip 4 has been out for a few months and has gone down in the price tag quite a bit. So starting off, if you want to pick up either one of these phones, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now starting off with the outside, the Z Flip 4 came out a little bit later last year, so in the August timeframe in 2022, and it was a pretty decent phone. I think it was a pretty decent upgrade coming from the Z Flip 3. And on the front panel, the main panel, you had a 6.7 inch, foldable dynamic AMOLED display. It was 1080p, 120 Hz. You did have that 1.9 inch Super AMOLED cover display on the front, but most people probably won't be using that. But that display was actually pretty good. Now, I will say with their foldable displays, they do have a leg up compared to some other competitors, which there really aren't any, to be honest. But when you have that type of display on the Galaxy S23, it is an overall better display. You don't have a crease in the middle. You don't have this weird type of texture overlaying it. I personally do feel like Samsung knocks that out of the park with all their displays, and for a foldable, the Flip 4 is pretty good. But I do like the S23's display more, just because it doesn't have that crease in the middle, and it just looks better. I feel like that panel gets brighter, and I think that is probably the better panel when it comes down to it. On the S23, you have that 6.1 inch dynamic AMOLED display, full HD on the front, 120 Hz as well. But as I mentioned, you get 1200 nits of peak brightness on both, but the Z Flip 4 taps out at 1200, with the S23 can go up to 1750 nits. So definitely right there, you're getting a better display brightness on the S23. So that's probably a big thing to keep in mind. Both have USB-C ports on the bottom and on the back. And there's a little bit of a different layout here too. Now with the Z Flip 4, you have a dual camera setup, but if it's folded, I guess it's kind of on the front if you're thinking about the camera. With the S23, you have a triple camera setup. So you're already getting more cameras. You're getting, I guess, frosted glass backs on both these phones, which is actually pretty nice. Having a frosted glass back is really nice, and I'm glad that the Z Flip 4 actually has that type of capability too, which is really awesome. Now beyond that, they both are very different feeling phones. They both have different architectures to them, but when they're unfolded and if we're just looking at them like that, definitely there's a lot of overlap and a lot of similarity. But with the Z Flip 4, it is overall a bigger phone, so definitely keep that in mind as well. So on the outside, that kind of covers it up for the most part. Now in the camera department, this is also something that, is going to tailor the S23 more because it does have a better camera. With the Z Flip 4, you have a dual camera setup, a 12 megapixel wide angle lens and then a 12 megapixel ultra wide camera, whereas on the S23, we have a 50 megapixel wide angle lens, 10 megapixel telephoto lens, and then a 12 megapixel ultra wide camera. We can do 4K at 60 on the back, we can do 4K at 30 on the front of the Z Flip 4, but on the S23, we actually do have 8K 30 on the back, and we have 4K at 60 on the front. So the resolutions are already better on the S23, but the camera UI and the camera in general is going to be similar. There's going to be a lot of overlap, but the S23 is definitely going to be getting you a better camera setup. For one, you have a few more features built into the S23 that the Z Flip 4 doesn't have, like the resolution filming. I will also argue that with something like the Z Flip 4, its camera wasn't even as optimized as the S22 from last year. So we all kind of know that the S23 is a bigger upgrade from the S22 than the Z Flip 4 is. So this Flip lineups never really had that great of a camera, even with the folds. They kind of had like a watered down camera compared to their S lineup, and that's just kind of the trade that you're kind of doing. When you have a foldable device like the Z Flip 4, that's a really cool mechanism, but you are giving up some things, and the camera in this specific situation is one of those things. So I will say the S23's camera is better. The Z Flip 4's camera is still good, but an added benefit of the Z Flip 4 is that you can actually kind of like position your Z Flip 4 like folding it halfway, and you can kind of film yourself doing some things that way too, which is kind of funny. But regardless, I would probably say the S23 is the better camera when it comes down to it. Now beyond that, with software longevity, the Z Flip 4 is probably going to last as long as the S22, although the chipset inside is actually much better than the S22 in my opinion. The chipset is actually probably more in line with the S23, but even with that being said, the S23 is probably going to be the one that's going to outlast these devices. We've seen it with the first generation Z Flip, we've seen it with the Z Flip 2, Z Flip 3, so many devices, even with the Notes that came out before. The Note that came out that year would also last as long as the S that came out that year as well, even though they're pretty much kind of months and months apart. That's kind of how these things go. So even though the Z Flip 4, came out many months after the S22, you are pretty much going to be getting a phone that's going to last as long as the S22 in my opinion. So in this case, totally okay. The S22 is still going to be lasting a very long amount of time too, but the S23 is definitely going to be the one that's going to outlast the Z Flip 4 when it comes down to it. Now, in the performance and the performance of both these phones, let's go and talk about it. The Z Flip 4 had that Snapdragon 8 plus Gen 1 chipset inside of it, but it had 8 gigabytes of RAM. Now with the S23, pretty much almost the exact same thing, but you are getting that Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 chipset inside with 8 gigabytes of RAM. Now, the one thing that I saw a lot last year towards the end of it when the 8 Plus Gen 1 was announced was that this chipset was very well optimized, or much more optimized, coming from the 8 Gen 1 chipset. So if you remember with the 8 Gen 1 that was on the S22 and those devices, I liked them a lot. A lot of people like them, but it just wasn't as optimized. And I didn't find this out until way later because I, play games in every once in a while, but when the next device comes out, we're kind of on to the next one. But then I started using the S22 a lot more, and I realized that a lot of people were right. It really isn't as optimized. I would almost always play my games on a charger, and when I unplugged it, it would pretty much die. I mean, it wasn't that great of it was a good performing phone, but I would feel like it would thermal throttle a lot, and also the battery life would go down a lot, quickly. Compared to something like the Z Flip 4, from a lot of people's standpoint, it's much more optimized there, which is great. That's why I kind of think that the Z Flip 4 chipset is more in line with something like a Galaxy S23 than a Galaxy S22. So with the S23, we're getting that newer chipset. We're getting the same amount of RAM between both, which is fine. But with that newer chipset, you are kind of taking the learnings that Qualcomm has done with that 8 Plus Gen 1 chipset, and they are bringing that over to that new 8 Gen 2, which is really cool. Newer chipsets are almost always better, unless you're talking about the 8 Gen 1. So I think with the S23, you're going to be getting a very, very good performing phone. And I would probably argue it's going to be a better performing phone overall than the Z Flip 4, but it's not going to be worlds different. It's going to be very similar in my opinion, and that's when I look at the Z Flip 4 and I'm like, well, it's not like this phone has a weird, an older 888 chipset inside. It's still a very good chipset, but the S23 is going to be the better performing phone, but it's going to be it's pretty much not even going to be comparable. Both these phones are going to be very fast. If you're playing games, if you're playing emulators, if you're playing standard stuff, if you're opening up standard applications, you're going to be getting a very similar experience between both, in my opinion. Now that kind of cycles down to battery life as well. You have a 3700 mAh battery on the Z Flip 4, 3900 mAh battery on the S23, and there's definitely a lot of overlap here, but I would probably argue that the S23 is going to be giving you possibly better battery life, but I'm going to test that out later. I'm going to see. I saw that the Z Flip 4 had pretty good battery life last year, but we're going to go and test that out further and kind of see where we land. So to kind of sum up this whole entire video, what I'll tell you is, I definitely do think a phone like a Galaxy Z Flip 4 is cool. It's a novelty, but it's a very fast phone, and it's pretty much more optimized than the S22 last year. It's gone down in price tag quite a bit from last year as well. And if you really like a folding phone and you know what you're getting into, then by all means go for it. But the S23 is going to be the better performing phone. It's going to have better cameras. It's going to have better battery life potentially, better display, and that's probably the phone that probably makes more sense for people to buy. But I think beyond that, something like the Z Flip 4 is still good, but at that point I would just recommend going for S23 probably in the next few months when that phone goes down in price tag. So that pretty much kind of covers it up. If you have any other thoughts or questions, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, not me so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.